Hello and welcome to the Unifying Force. I'm Catherine, joined here by Giovanni. How are you this morning?
I'm pretty good. I have a couple of flu-style symptoms, but that doesn't stop us from doing a Facebook stream live and on Zoom. So hopefully talking about Star Wars will help me feel spiritually better.
Yes, and that's why I picked by happenstance, I picked a very spiritual topic this week.
Oh yeah, it's the
Mortis
most
and
spiritual yet.
yes, Mortis and the World Between Worlds. For anybody who may not be familiar, Mortis is a world that seems to exist outside the space-time continuum, which Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka got stranded in during the Clone Wars. The world is ruled by the father, who controls the son, who represents the dark side, and the daughter, who represents the light side. The World Between Worlds, on the other hand, has the mural of Mortis, of the Mortis gods, on the gateway, and it leads to another place outside the space-time continuum, which allows you to access these portals to go almost anywhere you want in the Star Wars saga, to either interfere with events or maybe just observe them. It's very interesting. And I remember when these episodes first premiered for Mortis in season 3, I had a plethora of questions. I was so fascinated by it. The father basically wants to test Anakin to see if he's the chosen one, because the father believes he's dying and that he needs the chosen one in order to control his 2 children. Otherwise, the entire galaxy will fall into chaos, which is interesting. Because again, it exists outside the space-time continuum. How would something spiritual going on over here affect the rest of the galaxy? And I remember when the Blu-ray came out, I went on this marathon type quest to go pick up the Blu-ray, walking miles to the store to get it, because I was assuming that there was going to be a big making of documentary for it, because there always are in these Blu-rays. And I was so disappointed when I finally got home. I cracked open my cold beverage. I was so exhausted. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. And there was only a 2.5-minute clip of Dave Filoni basically saying that to answer the questions of the Mortis trilogy would defeat the purpose of the trilogy, that you're supposed to ask questions. Yes. But he said that every possible question that fans could have has a very specific answer, which I thought was very interesting for something that seems so mysterious. So I thought this was just ripe for conversation, especially when you consider the whole notion of astral planes and how there are all sorts of real world religions that seem to believe in the same types of ideas. So what was your takeaway on Mortis and the World Between Worlds, Gio?
Okay, so it would have been awesome to have been able to rewatch them in the past couple of days, but unfortunately, opportunity did not arise. However, they are burned onto my mind's eye because I loved them, and when I'm lucky in that I have a very weird memory that specifically remembers, lines of dialogue from even minor ones in films and TV that I enjoy, and when I really love something, it stays with me forever. Knock on wood. I hope I don't lose that ability. So yeah, I recall the entire trilogy 3-part episode arc of the Mortis storyline, and then the World Between Worlds actually shocked me because I did not think they would revisit Mortis or the Lords and the Ones, the Holy Trinity in a way, again in Star Wars. I thought it was one and done, and it was a perfect beginning, middle, and end in the Clone Wars in season 3. I was disappointed that we got to season 6 and the Lost Missions and we never revisited them even in mentioning, but I think Dave Filoni maybe always had it in mind later in the saga to revisit them in a huge and significant way, and it could not have been more significant in the arcs of all the characters in Rebels, some Clone Wars characters, and then of course Anakin Skywalker's journey as Darth Vader. So yeah, if you haven't seen them, please find the Blu-rays or borrow them, stream them on Disney Plus. They are must watches, not just for Star Wars fans, but for fans of TV, film, literature, poetry, mythology, spirituality, any kind of consumptive medium where you want to be entertained or you want to be learning and enriched. I really recommend it. To me, they are essential mandatory viewing for anyone who likes to binge watch things or stream things in this modern lockdown era. I put it up there with The Wire. I think everybody who has access to Wi-Fi and TV and a computer should watch The Wire, and I think everybody should watch the Mortis arc, even if you don't like sci-fi fantasy. We can go into why exactly I feel that so strongly in a little bit, but I'll hand it back over to you, Catherine.
Yeah, it is really interesting you put it that way, because with Mortis, the fact that the first question I had was, how did this gateway appear just randomly in the galaxy? The fact that it's appearing in the Clone Wars, right on the verge of the downfall of the Jedi, and the fact that the father, in a sense, is correct that, if you don't rein in my son and my daughter, then we're going to have a lot of problems. And the fact that Anakin doesn't stay sort of it makes me wonder, is that the reason why the Sith plan eventually comes to fruition? Because he didn't do his job at staying behind and managing the gods. I mean, granted, the daughter and the son died at the end of that arc, but I wondered, since these are technically gods, do they die in the traditional sense, or they just, their spiritual ethereal form maybe just disappeared from that particular astral plane? Because the fact that, clearly there's a lot of magic going on here. The fact that Qui-Gon is able to commune with Obi-Wan, the fact that the son is able to show Anakin all the horrible to do is Darth Vader, that the father purges that memory from Anakin's mind, and it's just really playing around with this ideas of. It reminded me a bit of the Wills, which was George's original concept, that Star Wars story was going to be a bunch of journal entries written by these beings that exist outside the space-time continuum. And the closest thing we've ever got to seeing anything like the Wills was the Force priestesses in the storyline where Yoda goes to the heart of the galaxy. And so I do wonder how if Mortis has any connection with that as well, because the heart of the galaxy is also where all the midichlorians come from. It's where, the Force priestesses are, and the fact that the Mortis gateway is also on the world between worlds. So, like you said, I think Filoni actually planned way in advance. I think he knew when they were writing the Mortis trilogy that they were going to bring the world between worlds in at some point. Granted, at the time they wrote that arc, Disney had not yet bought Lucasfilm, so the plan for Rebels had not yet been planned necessarily. But I'm pretty sure they planned that, and I'm way in advance, and we might see it again. But looking at even the world between worlds, it's like I had a bunch of questions there as well, because it's like, okay, you have these doorways to all these very specific moments in the saga, and I'm wondering, are the moments that the characters are being shown dependent on who is walking around in the world between worlds? Like, say, if Boba Fett was walking in there, maybe we've seen something different. Kind of like, like the Ahsoka show is going to be coming at some point, and the logo for the Ahsoka show is featuring a lot of the same hieroglyphs that you'll find surrounding the doorways, beings that exist.
Sorry, were you talking? I think my machine double loaded the video. Don't worry.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah. So you had an echo of yourself from Facebook Live, which is the beginning of the recording.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that was an interesting idea, because now that we know the Ahsoka show is going to dive into that a little bit more, and of course the only thing they've really used the world between worlds for so far is to save Ahsoka. I take it there's going to be more value to it than that, and I do assume it's going to come back. I wonder if she's going to use it to try and find Thrawn, because we know that Palpatine had tried to gain access to it. Probably either for military ability to have better control over the galaxy, or maybe because he's genuinely mysteries. But as this opens all sorts of doorways, and again, I was tying that back into religion, because you have something similar that you see in the movie Black Panther from Marvel Studios, where they have the ceremony where the new king can commune with the former kings in this astral plane and seek counsel. And that's kind of what's going on in Mortis in a way. Like granted, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka didn't deliberately go to Mortis, but they go there and they do get a lot of wisdom while they're there, and get to leave much different than they were than when they got there.
Yeah, it's a very spiritual journey. So, shall I summarize the actual plot points of the Mortis trilogy, and then you can do the World Between Worlds one, or before we dive
Sure,
into it?
go for it. Yeah, sure, go
Yeah.
for it.
So, I just as you were talking, because I always like to do research in parallel to when we're talking, as well as having just always been reading beforehand. So there's a site that I think is pretty well written just now, March 28th, 2020, and it essentially is making the argument that the soapbox stand for the Clone Wars being essential, mandatory Star Wars viewing for any casual fan as well as more hardcore fans. So let's just remind ourselves. So Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka are on a shuttle, and they seem to be on a mission, the Clone Wars. I don't remember how Admiral Yularen introduces it, but it's nothing especially bizarre. There's a mysterious signal. They're going to have to investigate it. They're following a course of a line among the stars, and they pick up the signal, and it seems to not be from their time zone. And it's interesting because Star Wars has never really touched on time or the actual physics of space, time, and light speed and warp speed travel, because that's much more of a specific science fiction thing. And Star Wars, obviously, uh, people fly between planets the way people sail between islands, without huge years passing between them, which is what you would realistically have. And films like Interstellar reveal that. But so Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka are actually drawn into this planet, which it transpires later may or may not be physically there. And the signal is centuries old, and they soon find out over the course of the first episode through various visions and voices that this could be one of the original places the Force began. And it's definitely a strong energetic nexus beyond time and space itself. So no time passes between the characters or the life, the flora and fauna on the planet. And it seems to be a flourishing planet with three characters, so three kind of ruling overlords. And the first chapter, I believe, is called Overlords. You have the father, the daughter, and the son. And this concept of a magic three holy trinity is obviously present in Christianity, is most famously, but it's actually universal in our world. And it must tie back to something to do with maybe the original Zodiac, which bounced around between kind of East Asia, then the Middle East, and then came to the pre-ancient Hellenic period, and then became classical Greece, and then was adopted and kind of hijacked by the Roman Republic and then Roman Empire, and then it just disseminated. And it's funny, people actually are still quite into astrology, especially during times of hardship and adversity, such as this coronavirus pandemic and lockdown. I've had so many random conversations with people who say, "Oh, what star sign are you?" just while you're waiting to get coffee. And I say, I mean, I don't think anything of it is logical or I believe a word of it. But if you want to know my horoscope thing, I think I'm an Aries. And people start saying, "Oh, you're an Aries. Well, I'm a something else." We are not or definitely compatible. And I think, right, gonna try not to show my eyes rolling. But there's a reason why people hold on to these things. And I guess the spiritual aspect of things, whether it's based on logic and facts and evidence, or whether it's based on just, I guess, fiction, you can say, it doesn't really matter, because that's not the idea of faith. The idea of faith is to give you something intangible that you can always hold on to. And the whole idea is you cannot physically perceive it with your five senses. It's something beyond that. Fortunately, if you're a consenting adult human who's had normal development and not too much trauma, you have an ability to consider many different ideas and viewpoints and then draw your own conclusions. But you can choose, if you wish, to believe in something. And it doesn't have to be a higher power or a deity or something divine. It can be just goodness in the world, or the planet Earth itself, or the morality of humans being slightly better than not so better. But this is actually a concept that's written in the book Sapiens, which was very popular about 4 years ago. I used to see every other person commuting with a book in hand was reading Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. And I started reading it, and it's the only popular science book that I just decided to stop reading. That's purely because I did not enjoy the way he writes. It just wasn't for me. But I'm very pedantic with writing styles. He had a couple of interesting ideas though, and he was saying that religion in the modern age, from the 20th century onwards into the 21st, has been replaced by capitalism and commercialism. So he took the example of Henry Ford, and iconography of Ford. And I guess for me, to make it a bit more relevant to me, I would say pick a supercar like Lamborghini or Ferrari or Porsche. The iconography is instantly recognizable to most people who've seen cars growing up, wherever they grow up in the world, even if it's just online. You instantly see a logo and you think, okay, it's going to be a supercar. It's going to have a great engine sound. It's going to be a V8 and have turbo injection, twin throttle or whatever, and be 600 brake horsepower, something that Jeremy Clarkson would love on the Amazon Prime show. But it's something that you believe in. It doesn't have to be material. So you might not have never, you may never have seen a Ferrari in real life, but you choose to believe it exists based on your perception.
So you like relating that back to the notion that they may have believed that a place like Mortis existed in terms of the kind of like in a lot of world religions where they believe that there's places like heaven and hell, even though they've never actually been there, kind of like
exactly that. I think it's a way of rationalizing people having
hadn't actually been there before, but they started seeing it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be blind faith, because I don't advocate blindly doing anything in life. And what I mean blindly, maybe that's a bit ableist and an outdated phrase, but what I mean is to go by a single point and then just go all the way with it. As I mentioned, if you're an adult, I think you should have the maturity and presence of mind to consider multiple points of view without starting to quote Ben Kenobi, and then draw your own conclusion, whether it's about a film that you're being recommended or you read a trash review about the latest Fast and Furious film, watch it, judge for yourself. And I think it's the same with beliefs, faith, spirituality, and then organized religion as well, because organized religion in its essence is based on belief, faith, goodness, morality, and sense of spirit.
An interesting thing about that, though, is that none of the characters in the Star Wars galaxy, at least that we know of, seem to even be aware of Mortis. It just kind of came out of nowhere, and even Palpatine finds out about it second-handedly in Rebels, which for that, to sum up that bit real quick, is when the main cast of the Ghost returns to Lothal, they find that the Empire is engaging this major excavation. They've uncovered the mural of the world between worlds, and they manage to the gateway, but Ezra can't, and he's guided there by the Loth Wolves, which begs the question: why does Ezra have this sort of psychic connection to them? Like, what's extra special about him that wasn't necessarily special about the others? And he's able to go in there, and from a plotting standpoint, he walks through the gateway. He's walking along this astral plane. He's seeing all of these major events from both the cartoons and live action movies, and he eventually comes upon the last time he saw Ahsoka, and she's about to be killed by Darth Vader. He reaches in and grabs her, pulls her through the portal, and she's kind of amazed at the world they're in and trying to figure out what it is. But she reasons that they probably shouldn't do anything else. And Palpatine, however, manages to try and break in. They make their escape, and Ahsoka I believe that Ahsoka went back through the same doorway, but because it was years later now, because once you come out of the gateway, you are in the present timeline, and then you go back in and you will be in the future timeline from there as well, which is why she's not going back to the collapsing temple. She's going back to the temple, which is already collapsed, and she's safe. Which leads me to Scooby's question: will this come back? I think absolutely this is going to come back in other shows. In a sense, it already has, because in the second season of Mandalorian, we see that Ahsoka is being followed around by those owls, which we first saw in the World Between Worlds, flanking certain gateways. And she somehow now has a connection with them, possibly simply because she went through the doorway. So that might be those creatures. I can't remember the exact names, but those owls may be the reason that she ends up finding her way back there in the Ahsoka show, because she seems to be looking for Thrawn right now. She doesn't seem to be looking for another gateway, but those owls are still kind of following her. So I take it that's going to come back. And when you consider the amount of years that have been between each of these episodes, like the Mortis episodes originally premiered, I believe it was around February or March of 2011. Then you had the World Between Worlds episodes in the last season of Rebels, which I believe was February 2015, February 2016, around there. And now here we are. We had the November 2019, or no, November 2020 rather, for the second season of Mandalorian with the Ahsoka and the owls following her. So I think they do definitely have plans. I think it will most definitely be back for sure in the Ahsoka show. But I'm also very curious as to where it's all leading, because Star Wars has never really been that outward about, like, even when they believe in the Force, like the Jedi, when they're talking about the Force, they never really talk about another plane of existence like heaven or hell. They're just talking about how the Force, it influences everything. And we didn't really get to see any evidence of another plane until the Mortis episodes, which is why I think it blew so many people away. It's like, wow, there's like an actual world that is a manifestation of Force. And interestingly enough, if you recall, when Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka first discovered Mortis, it wasn't in the shape of a planet. It was in the shape of this diamond-shaped spaceship, which is really interesting.
It reminded me of Star Trek: The Next Generation, actually, that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's right. They're called the Morai.
But yeah, the
So Scooby
convoys.
asks, why do we think the Morai is inside? Do you think she can because she's the spirit of the sister? Ooh, that is
Yes,
a good point
yes,
because
I do. Yeah, I do think she is.
yeah, that's right, because she did get the sister's life essence when she came back. So that's true.
Yeah,
And I wonder if that's foreshadowing what her destiny might be.
I,
Because
yeah,
as we know, we heard her voice in The Rise of Skywalker when Rey is trying to commune with the spirit of the past Jedi, and which seems to suggest that Ahsoka may no longer be amongst the world of the living, because every other character who was communing with her, we know for a fact had already died. So
hmm
that makes me think that she might end up back at Mortis at some point, because it does make you wonder, because now that she kind of has the spirit of the sister in her, but unlike the sister and the son who were living in Mortis, Ahsoka is kind of wandering the galaxy. And as we know, the son's goal was to try and get into the real galaxy to start wreaking havoc. And, the heroes stopped him from doing that. But since the sister has since been reborn in Ahsoka and is now wandering the galaxy, it sort of begs the question as to where are they going with this, you know? Because while hunting down Thrawn is a noble thing to do, he's not exactly something I would associate that the world between worlds or the Mortis gods would really be concerned about. He's like a very terrestrial type of threat. So I'm very intrigued to see where this goes. And it does open the door for infinitely more questions. And I wonder if Mortis also has ties to the heart of the galaxy. I would assume that it does. And that the Force priestesses probably know more about it if only Yoda knew about it. Because that's something that I also thought was frustrating, is that after the Mortis trilogy, we don't know if they really told Yoda about their experiences there. We never hear the Jedi Council's take on it. It's just kind of, they just don't really bring it up again, which is a little disappointing. We think we have another question here. Let's see.
yeah. I mean, I would say that the key thing is that so the owl species are known as convoys. I just dropped the link from the Star Wars Databank official website, and yeah, Morai is the one that has the same color palette as the daughter. I was going to say the sister. She is the sister of the dark side son, the daughter.
Yeah.
I think that there's a very clear. I'm concerned that in the same way that
Are we?
people were
Oh, okay.
terrified
Let's see. Oh, there
of
you go.
in the same way that people were terrified of midichlorians and over-explaining and removing the mystery and magic of the Force in the prequel trilogy, I think I'm completely fine with that, because there's no reason why scientific fiction and explanations in a scientific or science fiction sense, like the midichlorians are, it does clash quite jarringly initially with the space opera romantic space fantasy that the original trilogy was, but it's very compatible if
In
you
a
look at
bit,
spirituality.
kind of, because I think that the whole point of the midichlorians was it was a thing that George came up with to make the point that the Jedi were losing their way. That rather than qualifying somebody based on their traits or who they
Yeah,
are as a person, they're basing it on, what their DNA says. And when you think about it, Anakin being a chosen one doesn't really mean anything. He doesn't ever do anything super different with the Force than other characters. It's just that other characters putting stock in the idea of him being a chosen one is what allows to transpire the way they do. So the midichlorian thing, I think that's kind of really the only purpose of that really served, and it just kind of got blown out of proportion. But this also leads to another question somebody's asking: do we think that the Sith dagger in Rise of Skywalker looks a bit similar to the Mortis dagger? And that's a very interesting point as well, because the fact that there's all sorts of stuff in mythology about, you have to get the ancient sword or whatever it is to complete the mission. And that's kind of what we saw in Mortis. They needed to
yeah,
get the sword in order to defeat the gods, and it did look very similar in design. And since we never really learned where the Sith dagger necessarily came from, like was it forged by the Sith? Did he get it somewhere else? We're not really sure, because timeline wise, Ochi would have gotten that dagger well after the World Between Worlds episodes in Rebels, so Palpatine is well aware of that world already. So did Palpatine access Mortis or sometime between then and there and get a dagger similar to that? I mean, it didn't seem like the Sith dagger had any superpowers or supernatural powers like the Mortis dagger did, but he might have styled it after that. Kind of like, back in World War II, the Nazis were obsessed with stealing everybody else's artwork and assuming and trying to rewrite the history, saying it was theirs and stuff. So maybe Palpatine decided to, if I can't have the Mortis dagger, I'll kind of make one of my own type of thing. Could be.
Right. I'm a
But
little
yeah,
lost.
I'm just.
Did you want me to
Yeah.
answer your previous 2 points or answer the question?
Yeah. Answer the points. Go for it.
Okay, all right. So on the
Where you want
dagger
to take
thing,
it.
yes, it's definitely a shout out from J.J. Abrams to say, "Hey, look, fans, I know about the Clone Wars. Look, sword thingy and dark side and Sith language. Sith language. Oh, look, Sith, serpent snaky thing. It's Nagini. No, it's not. It's the dragon from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. No, it's not. I actually really like the aesthetic of the desert of Pisana, even though I'm so exhausted with desert planets. I mean, I find sand dunes boring and real on planet Earth. I do not want to see Tatooine done in slightly different shades and filters. It's
In
ridiculous.
Pistana's defense, I would say that the Wadi Rum Desert is the most beautiful desert in the world, and I think they should have used it for a setting in Star Wars a long time ago. But I do
Yeah, no, I
agree. I'm
agree with
kind of
that.
over
That's
deserts in
I'm
Star Wars
100%
as well.
agree with that. Yeah. And then going back to the other point, I would fundamentally disagree with everything you're saying about Anakin basically having no role, even though he's termed the chosen one. It's just for the fulfillment
Oh
of the
no, he has a
Jedi's
role. I just
prophecy.
meant that in terms of his I don't think his midichlorians have anything to do with it. His midichlorian count, like he definitely has something to do with it. But I mean, he doesn't exhibit any superior force power, which you would think somebody with a extremely high midichlorian count would have, based on
He
the way
does
they
though.
explain what midichlorians
He
do.
does though. He does in the Mortis arc. He does. And then as Darth Vader in the 2017 Charles Soule line, he does as well. Because he has a metaphysical experience with another gateway between worlds on when he's constructing his tower, his
I,
fortress
I,
on
I
Mustafar.
meant more. Right. I meant more in relation to the main Skywalker saga in terms of the main major points in terms of the fall of the Jedi and the revenge and the rise of the Sith again. Like he has a role to play there, but he doesn't end up needing to use his superior force powers to achieve that. It's kind of
Yeah,
like,
but I
yes, he
think that
does some
goes
neat
into
things in Mortis and the Charles
yeah,
Soule, I agree, he does. But in terms of the actual Skywalker saga major installments along this overarching
yeah.
plan of the Force apparently had, he doesn't really, maybe I have a fan theory. I don't know if you agree or not, but do we think that maybe his force
Just
powers are
shoot,
the
yeah.
reason he survived being burned alive on Mustafar?
100%, yeah. I think it's very much implied by George Lucas, by the fact that he starts burning and then physiologically your skin wouldn't stop burning and your clothes would continue burning, but the flames are extinguished. And I thought that was maybe scientifically one of the most accurate things we ever see in Star Wars on screen, because he wasn't even close to the actual lake of lava. He was a couple of feet from it, and he just caught a light, and the speed of which he caught a light and the CGI and makeup was phenomenal for 2005, but even for 2021, that's an absolutely untouchable scene. No one needs to go back and ever do anything with that scene. And I hope no one ever does. But yeah, and then also I would add when Darth Sidious descends and says, there he is, talking to his commanders, and they go and get a medical shuttle to kind of emergency evac back to Coruscant, to his nefarious lab and hospital. Sidious, the Emperor, bends down towards Anakin, and passage of time in the final 20 minutes of Revenge of the Sith, following their duel concluding, is very ambiguous. So for me, Anakin's been lying there for several hours, left to dwell in all his BS, essentially. And he's feeling as if he wants to just tumble into the lava, but he doesn't even have the limbs to crawl over and suicide himself. So that is the ultimate torture. And I mean, I think in our world, most spiritual traditions and organized religions, because there's a very significant difference between them, and it's very much a Western and Eastern classification thing to do with universities, academia, really. It's just jargon. But the organized religions are the establishments, institutions, the temples, mosques, and churches, and then spirituality is the philosophy, morality, and the concepts, and the belief and faith beyond something that's physical. Anakin was holding on to something to stay alive, whether it was dark or light, doesn't matter. He was holding on to the Force. His will to hate himself, I believe, exceeded his will to want to kill himself. And that's the only reason why he survived. And then the Emperor sensed that, and I think performed the first on-screen Force heal or essence transfer, when he held his hand above Anakin's face by a couple of inches and then gets to within a few centimeters and then stops. He doesn't touch because a few hours later, Anakin would still be burning hot. And Sidious has already been burned once in that film, quite
Right.
memorably.
Speaking of which, since Ahsoka essentially came out of Mortis as a living embodiment of the sister in a way, or the daughter in a way, do we think
Yeah.
that maybe when Anakin killed the son, that he may have somehow processed some of his powers as well? Kind of like, because if the Mortis gods are gone
Yes. Yes.
and there's no real if there's, since they're gone and yet the galaxy didn't seem to fall into chaos, like the rest of the, Palpatine's plan continued to play out as he planned it. But I wonder if maybe Anakin did somehow pick up on some ethereal thing of the sun, which begs the question: if Anakin is sort of the living embodiment of the son after Mortis, and Ahsoka is now the living embodiment of the daughter, then who's the father? And where are we going to see the father pop up again, or the
So
next
the
representation of the father? Could it be Ezra?
I'd say the father is not in one individual, but it's in many, and they're all vying for that role over Anakin and Ahsoka. Obi-Wan should have been the one to occupy that role, but he stepped down and went into solitude. And I think in the Obi-Wan series, you'll see Qui-Gon commune with him again. So there's a couple of really important moments in Mortis. Firstly, I just want to shout out specifically to the episodes we're talking about, the chapters of the Clone Wars and Rebels. So it's in season 3, it's chapter 15, and it's called Overlords, then Altar of Mortis, then Ghosts of Mortis. And then finally in the Lost Missions, the final season 6, before the Clone Wars was temporarily shut down by Disney when they took over, features Yoda, and that's called Voices. And then we skip forward chronologically in Star Wars time to Rebels and the dark times of the Empire. There's Wolves and a Door, and then A World Between Worlds, which completely blows open the possibilities in an ethereal way in the Star Wars universe. But what I think is fantastic, and I think is the point of this discussion, is how it's inspired and very much lifted in an homage way from multiple sources within our world and various diverse cultures, of this sense of there's something beyond the 5 physical senses that we perceive. And there is something, because I mean, it comes down to what is consciousness. That's an awareness, maybe an energy or an ability to connect with things and see goodness in things and feel
Right.
badness too. Empathy, compassion. And these are things that the Jedi espouse as part of their principles and code. And these are things that have been, kind of hyped up in very geographically disparate places around the world and spread out over millennia. I've been going back deep diving into what's considered classics by kind of Western universities over this 2021 lockdown. And I picked up the Epic of Gilgamesh. And that's one of the oldest stories known in all of world literature. And it's actually translated, and it's incomplete, and it's on stone tablets and carvings. So it's an incomplete story, but it's been kind of hobbled together as best as possible by various academics. That's worth having a look at. But if you want to go something a little bit more recent and more accessible, because these are all in the public domain, you can legally just Google and find a PDF to read on your phone. There's Dante's Divine Comedy. And I read The Inferno by Dante Alighieri in February. I picked up a little Penguin Classics paperback version. And unfortunately, someone spilled coffee on the back. So I quickly put it down. But I asked in the bookstore, do you have an Italian version? And I was thinking, why don't I just go the whole hog, and rather than learn Italian for fun, just as a lockdown hobby, rather than just video gaming all day, why don't I try and get some of these classics and read them in their original language? And I was very fortunate to meet somebody who's lived in Italy for 14 years, and we picked out on the shelf a single hardback copy of Dante's Inferno, which is what I have here. And the amazing thing is, it's what's called dual text. So the cantos are Italian on one side and English on the other. So you can genuinely read line for line, practice Italian, even if you have no understanding of it. It's a lot of fun. And the reason why I mention this is because that's a spiritual epic where Dante is essentially writing about a version of himself, maybe in another plane, a spiritual plane. And to summarize, he sees a girl, she's awesome. He tries to follow her and she dies. So he descends into the underworld to find her and recover her soul. That's the story of Dante's Inferno. And he descends through several circles of hell, which go in depth according to what's written in the Bible. And you can see this kind of spiritual journey and hero's journey, which is what we talked about previously with the hero with 1,000 faces and Joseph Campbell. And it comes back to that kind of monomyth, monoculture. There are certain stories that are always recurring because they're inspirational and uplifting, and they make us feel good in times of peace and in times of horror and chaos, such as right now. And that's why I think we love Star Wars and we love mythology, and some of us love spirituality too. It all connects. They
Right.
might be parallel, but they're all linked.
Yeah, so that level of symbolism brings me to this. Our next question we have is, do we think the Loth Wolves that guide Ezra to the world between worlds, and the fact that the wolves get in, is just a result of Filoni's love of wolves, or something more spiritual?
Sorry, is that on the Facebook chat or the Zoom?
That's on our. It's a question that got dropped. So, do we think that it's something more spiritual, or do we
Okay.
think uh, it's just Filoni expressing his love of wolves? I think it
Oh,
means something.
the wolves in the door. I mean, he obviously loves
Right.
wolves because otherwise, if he didn't love wolves, he would not choose that specific animal. But yeah, there's a native. I think there's a native indigenous element that Dave Filoni's fascinated by, and
Yeah.
I haven't watched the behind the scenes stuff on Disney Plus fully with the Mandalorian, but I know he has incredible round tables for the Mandalorian season 1, and I've told everybody to watch them. But I've only seen the first two or three.
Mm.
We did a watch along in 2020. And unfortunately, I could only be around for two of them. But the discussion was fantastic. And Dave Filoni, I mean, the more content from Dave Filoni you read or can watch, the better you'll feel as a Star Wars fan, because you'll just know that he really knows what's going on. And he is the true apprentice to the original
So did he?
Grandmaster.
Did he
Yeah.
mention? Did he mention anything about the wolves, or about
Uh,
the? You
no,
said
so
something about Native
I
Americans.
haven't watched enough of his interviews, but I will dive into it for next time and see if I can find him specifically shout out the wolves. But I do
Yeah,
know
I
that
don't.
he has a fascination with indigenous cultures, and wolves are used as a metaphor for yin and yang in some Native American spiritual traditions. There's a meme that went around about 5, 6 years ago, and I still see it forwarded or shared online on Facebook, and occasionally I might get it through WhatsApp. And it makes me laugh, not because I think it's derivative. The concept is cliche, but then some cliches are derivative and boring because they are so fundamentally true. They just get reshared all the time and you get a bit bored. Um, it's about you have two wolves. One is kind of like the good wolf, one's the bad wolf. And the bad wolf is, what Winston Churchill described as the black dog of anxiety and ego and insecurity and depression. And it can follow you around, or it can end up leading you and you're on his leash. Um, or there's the good wolf that you can ride into the sunset, as Ezra does. And I think very clearly in the chapter called Doom, um, in Star Wars Rebels, without fully spoiling that phenomenal piece of storytelling, it's very clearly going with that binary system of, Bogan and Ashla, light and dark, good and evil, yin and yang, Muri and Puri. I'm using concepts that are in our real world and in the Star Wars universe to describe the same thing, which is an antagonistic but almost symbiotic relationship between two polar forces, which essentially comes down to choice. So there's destiny, but you have a choice at every point in which there's a moment, a flashpoint in your destiny. Your pathway through existence may not be linear. And if we go into modern day physics and quantum stuff, the theory of the multiverse, which I fully back, but there's not enough actual evidence that you can say definitively, is that every single choice you have, and this is actually how I deal with my anxiety. So I'm going to get quite personal right now. Um, every single element or choice or decision you face in life doesn't matter, because if you're umming and ahhing or unsure, do I apply for that job? Do I take on that role? Do I say hi to that cool guy or cool girl I just met? I don't know. Do I reconnect with that friend over Zoom? Do I ring this old college buddy of mine because it's her birthday or his birthday? Just go for it. The reason why is because there are infinite variations of you that have had the same indecision and then have chosen every single possibility, even ones that you'll never even consider. Every single permutation is already happening at the same time as you're deciding. So don't fear stuff. Just do what
Right.
you instinctively feel. Because if the multiverse is real, there's a power. It's not physically like this, and the concepts are much more complicated, but essentially there's a parallel version of yourself, in the way Rey looked into that mirror in The Last Jedi. Imagine that's you, and your reflection is endlessly in front of you, behind you, but also in every compass direction in a 3D and 4D and
Well,
10D space.
In a way, that's kind of what the world between worlds is. It's sort of a gateway
Exactly.
to a multiverse because the moment you start interfering with things, you're creating, in a sense, a new reality. Because
Yeah.
I mean, which is why I was wondering because like I mentioned, when he pulls Ahsoka through the portal, she's safe, but she ends up going back out the same portal she came in. But this time, rather than returning to the temple of Malachor completely collapsing in on itself, it's already collapsed, it's already over, so she's safe. Because it's like, even though
Yeah.
the world between worlds seems to exist outside the space-time continuum, the person who first entered the doorway to get into the world between worlds, Ezra, entered from a point in time further in the future from where Ahsoka was pulled from. Thus, when Ahsoka entered the world between worlds by being pulled in, she, in a sense, moved forward in time to Ezra's position. Thus, when she returned through the doorway, she's back at that place like 14 years in the future,
Yeah.
which is sort of an interesting timeline thing, because now it begs the
Yeah.
question, where are we going with this? Is it a new multiverse? And yes, Spencer's
Yeah.
reminding us of a question. The Grand Inquisitor, does he look like the father? I don't think so. I think it's just a basic animation template. They
Yes.
use a lot
I
of
think they use
basic
the same CG model. Yeah.
they
I
use a lot
love
of the same CG models. I really like that character though, and the fact that the spoiler alert, the big reveal that he was one of the Jedi Temple guards, I thought was really cool.
that was the
And in
best
a sense, that's sort of
extension of the
him
character. Yeah.
straddling, yeah, and he's sort of straddling the light and the dark, kind of like the father does. But I think it was just a CG template because I don't think it's I don't think it was really tied back into that. But that would be cool if they did. I mean, I always wanted that character to come back. I thought he kind of got the short shrift.
Also, I love
But
Jason
yeah, so this
Isaacs,
whole
one of the best actors around from a British
yeah,
perspective, I think. And his voice acting is phenomenal. I loved him since Lucius Malfoy in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and I always thought he'd be a phenomenal Sith
right.
Lord.
But so this thing about when you combine Mortis and the world between worlds with the Force Priests, the heart of the galaxy,
Yeah.
it seems to double down on the idea that the wills are, in a sense, out there somewhere. I
Yeah.
mean, I know
Yeah.
Star Wars has said that, oh, well, Baze and Root were the guardians of the wills, which really doesn't make any sense because they were the guardians of the Kyber Crystal Temple.
Yeah,
So they're not
the
guarding
Guardians,
wills, they're guarding
they're a bit like
crystals.
yeah, no, they're just Temple Guardians, a bit like the Grand Inquisitor's former life. I think they're
Right.
just physical guardians, but they're bouncers, they're security for the Kyber crystals. It's expensive stuff.
Right. And that was the weird thing, is like if they're guarding a temple of crystals, then why are they called the guardians of the wills? So I was wondering, maybe that'll tie in somehow. I'm not really
I
sure.
have a
But anyway,
theory.
but the fact that the crystals themselves, come to think of it, reach out to the Jedi. It's like the Kyber crystal
Yeah, I have a theory
chooses
for that.
the apprentice, and I wonder if that, in a sense, probably does connect to
Yeah, I have a
Mortis, the
theory.
world between worlds, in some sense. Okay, let's hear it.
My theory is that I've always thought this in Star Wars before I even came across the EU stuff. So when I was kind of 4 years old and Luke first switched on the lightsaber, I thought it was like a magical sword, but made of light and laser, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I still think it's the coolest fictional weapon of all time. I think almost 100% of our audience would agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, which reminds me, I still need to watch that Disney video where they revealed an actual lightsaber. I haven't watched it. I've been sent it
Yeah.
100 times. Um, but I thought that Luke's lightsaber, Anakin's lightsaber, his father's lightsaber, was spiritually calling to him. And that's why Obi-Wan knew exactly where to find him. Because Obi-Wan reached out in the Force or whatever. I mean, this theory developed as I got older and watched the films again and then read the ancillary material. But before even Disney canon started making it such that there are whispers of the crystals of Kyber, and they connect in a one-to-one situation, and then Sith bleed their crystals by torturing them with their malice and pain and frustration and hatred, and that physically and spiritually damages the spirit, the energy of the crystal, the force inside it, and then it bleeds red. And then the more intensely hatred they feel, the more brilliant, bright crimson it will be. Which is why Darth Vader's blade um, is actually a lot more intensely bright in red shade. That's my take on it. Than, for example, Darth Tyrannus, Count
So
Dooku. So I
yeah,
feel
so
that the wills are going to be a concept I don't want really explained. And a lot of these things that we're theorizing, I don't really want them to be overtly explained. I want them to just, I want Filoni, even if he storyboarded everything to the next nanometer, I want him to just sprinkle a little bit of salt and pepper and seasoning here and there of more spiritual clues to what he wants the audience generally to lean towards. I don't want him to say
right,
out and out, the wills are this spiritual race and they are alien witches and they gave birth to these the ones that were visions and voices for Yoda in the Lost Missions, and they wrote the refined Jedi sight chapter at the beginning of the Force Awakens novelization, and they are the ones that allowed R2D2 to retain his memories, because originally R2 was theorized by George Lucas as potentially being one of the guardians of the wills. The wills would be people who catalog and observe everything from an external spiritual plane and never interfere, a bit like the gods of Olympus maybe, but rather than messing with humans or the population of the galaxy, they would just observe and watch things, the flow of destiny and the Force, and record everything. And so Star Wars, the opening crawl, at some point was going to be actually just something that R2D2 or someone had cataloged, as a diary, a journal
Right.
of an epic moment in space history.
Right. I think that, like Filoni said, there are very specific answers to all our questions about this. And I
Yeah,
think eventually they will finish telling us the lore. I just don't think they're ever going to have a character spell it out all at once. Kind of like in The Last
good.
Jedi, Rian Johnson doesn't explain the entire history of what he's talking about. He just you've already seen the previous movies and know what Luke is talking about. And I think we're
Yeah.
going to see the same thing with the Mortis and the World Between Worlds. They're going to keep adding the lore, and eventually it'll all be there, but nobody's going to put it together for us. We'll be left to kind of do that on our own.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I
That's
think
kind of where
that
we're getting to.
we
The
don't
thing
need to
is,
have we don't need
it,
Michael Caine to go Chris Nolan style info dumping of exposition saying, listen here, Bruce, and then just explain why he's Batman or why the League of Shadows is the biggest threat to Gotham. The way Christopher Nolan often has a character, it's usually Michael Caine. Even in Interstellar or Inception, he
right.
explains the concept for everybody who's not really paying attention. And I
But
don't
in
mind
the
it, but a couple of my friends find that very patronizing to info dump such heavy exposition in one, 5-minute speech. And it's actually too much for a lot of general casual viewers. I
right,
don't think
and
Dave
that's
Filoni would do that.
well, yeah, but that goes back to a lot of the fanboys today who get angry about things. They need things spoon fed to them. They can't really think anymore, which is why a lot of these things flew over their heads in Episode
Yeah.
8. But
Oh yeah.
anyway, I think that it goes also this whole idea of these astral planes, like you were mentioning, it is tied back to a lot of world religions, the likes of which Joseph Campbell studied, and that the
Yeah.
idea that there are a
Let's
lot of
touch on that.
religions who believe that they can commune with this astral plane and this other place of existence, and they
Yeah.
do it for their own reasons, either for their own, like you said, either they're doing it for their own anxiety or they're doing it because they're looking for guidance. And I think they're just adding that into Star Wars as a way to honor the real world mythology in a way and tie it in. But
Yeah.
much like real world religions, where you don't have the answers to everything, or mythology where there's a lot of mysteries and you don't have specific answers, I think it's going to be, in a sense, the same way in Star Wars. We're not going to get we might get the whole picture, but it's never going to be spelled out enough. So it's
Yeah.
just another, in a sense, another tip in the hat to Joseph Campbell's work
Of course.
that we've seen. And I think they're going to use it as such. I don't think they're going to abuse it to use the world between worlds to retcon things they don't like. I don't think we're going to get there, but I really
No, no.
love this stuff. I can't wait to see where it goes in the future.
Yeah, I think the Obi-Wan series, the Ahsoka series, and whatever happens with Thrawn and Ezra in the future will definitely have substantial but not wholesome, complete conclusions and resolutions to these ideas, as well as these narrative storylines and character development. Most importantly, there's no point having spiritual mysticism in a story, whether it's written or televised or on screen, if you do not have relevant, empathetic, relatable characters and logical, fluid narrative structure and arcs and development. And Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have completely nailed it so far with Mandalorian, because on the surface, The Mandalorian is such a simple, stripped back, basic show, especially in season 1. But there's so many little moments, the Easter eggs or nuggets, I'd say, that really show the level of passion for the Star Wars galaxy from all the
Yeah,
cast and crew involved. So how much time do we have left? We have 10
only a
minutes?
minute. I was about to end the show once you finish your point.
Oh, okay. So let me just touch on actual specific world traditions. So just to wrap it up, and then Catherine will do a shout out to what's coming next week and in the
Yeah.
future. So sorry we started a little bit later than normal. But to just round it off, Mortis is a reflection and a mirror of our world. And I think Katie Lucas was the architect of that storyline, with George Lucas being obviously the overall grand vizier of it all. And the idea was to reflect what some people feel is true, even if they do not identify with a particular belief system, faith, spiritual tradition, or religion. But in the West, there's definitely elements of that you can find in Abrahamic traditions, whether it's Christianity, the Jewish faith, or Islamic faiths. And then just because it's always a minority thing, I'll touch on the Eastern stuff. Within the Shinto, Tao, Buddhist, Sikh, Jain, and Hindu belief systems, they don't have a word for religion. It's a philosophy known as Dharma or Dharma, which was popularized by JJ in The Lost. And maybe he wanted elements of that in The Rise of Skywalker, which we can come back to in a future chapter episode. But essentially, the idea of antagonistic forces of spiritual decision and power, like the two wolves I mentioned. So that meme that I mentioned is the final line is the wolf, like the good or the bad wolf, the happy wolf or the depressed wolf, whichever one that grows more and leads you in life is whatever you feed. The one that you feed more is the one that will grow and then dominate your destiny. And that comes back specifically to Star Wars and how there's a belief by the Sith that once you, and the Jedi originally from Yoda's generation and all the 900 years previously, that once you start down the dark path, forever will dominate your destiny. But the funny thing is, Yoda was kind of trolling Luke because he was saying you can redeem or destroy your father. But by the possibility of a slight redemption arc for Anakin, that goes against the entire Jedi Order as we know it from the prequels and from the original kind of material. And I think George is going to continue exploring this through Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. So we can touch on more spiritual traditions next time.
We will. And with that, I'm going to end this episode. Be sure to tune in next Sunday at 8 a.m. for the next episode of Jedi Archives. Join us every Tuesday at 4 Pacific for the Virtual Cantina Happy Hour. It's really fun. And the after hours at 6 is even better. Join us for Thursday night watch along, 7 Pacific. We have been watching episodes of The Bad Batch and talking about those, and that's been really great. Check out our TeePublic store where we got everything from shirts to sweaters, tote bags, and we got that's our Unifying Force t-shirt there that Gio's holding up. We also have merchandise for Jedi Archives. They've got their own shirts. We also have the Boom to Eve store. That's another one that you might want to check out. That's got a nice merchandise on it. And be sure to check the site, check the Celebration Anaheim page for the dates and times of the not so virtual cantina and the whatever we're calling the karaoke thing now. The name keeps changing.
Oh, I wasn't even aware of that. I'm gonna thank you for reminding me. I'm gonna check out the TeePublic stuff because there was a sale on, and I'm gonna check the Boom to Eve store for definite because I didn't really know that was a separate site. And I'm definitely gonna check the Celebration Anaheim 2022 page for all the latest updates on events, even though I'm kind of stranded and unable to fly at the moment. So thank you for all that.
For sure, yes. So check all that stuff out, and be sure to tune in Jedi Archives next week, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. This is the way. May the Force be with you all always. Bye.